And with me now is Noah Pransky. He is the national political editor for NBC LX. Pransky specializes in Gen Z and Millennials. Noah, good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Let's talk about these results and specifically the kind of turnout that we saw. How significant was it compared to what we've seen before?
Well, if you look at the national picture, a 27% turnout for adults under the age of 30 is the second best number we've seen in the last 30 years. It isn't quite to the level of 2018, but that was the high water mark. So at the end of the day, people under 30 are voting at higher rates today than their parents were 30 years ago.
What seems to be the motivating factor? Is there one overwhelming one, or is it a bunch of them depending on where you are?
Pundits love to point to one thing, but it is a lot of things. I mean, issues are first and foremost because young people are frankly disengaging from the two political parties. So they aren't going to the polls out of loyalty to their party. They're doing it because largely they're motivated by issues, things like, access to abortion, things like climate change, issues like social justice and Medicare for all in some cases. And when candidates don't talk about those issues, young people, frankly, don't have a lot of interest in going out and voting for them in a lot of cases. So it's frankly only when candidates speak the language of young voters, which is speaking about specific policies that can help them, that's when we're seeing young people go out to the polls. And it's honestly also a missed opportunity for Republicans because Republican outreach to young voters is next to nothing, even in key swing states. So just as much as Republicans are making inroads with Latino voters across the country, they're losing ground to Democrats with young voters.
Let's talk about the issue of abortion, because you certainly can understand why this would be an issue that would be particularly of interest to young voters who are thinking about starting families and how this might directly impact them. What did you find about how much that issue motivated them?
So we only have some preliminary numbers and exit polls, but leading up to the election, every single poll showed that if the voters said they cared about one issue and one issue only, voters under the age of 30 largely said that issue was either climate, economy, or abortion. Now, different polls found that those three things, might pop higher than the other, but ultimately, abortion was one of those single issues for a lot of people that maybe they were sitting on the sidelines before this summer, and then all of a sudden this summer really maybe awakened a lot of that electorate, particularly young women. We look at places like Michigan, where the initial estimates showed just a huge rocketing up of engagement among young women. Michigan, of course, had an abortion issue on the ballot. So that drove a ton of engagement. It drove people to the polls. And ultimately, those young people in Michigan helped drive really a blue wave in that state.
Yeah, that was a state where there was a specific abortion issue on the ballot. You didn't have to guess about what might happen down the road. What kind of voters are young voters? And I know I'm asking you a broad question, but, we also often look at what candidates are focusing on, what they say during speeches, what they say in their ads. But are these voters who are going down and doing research to see people's stances on things beyond what they just hear in the ads, or are they really going off of what the main stump speech is?
I think one of the big misunderstandings about young voters and young people in general, even those who don't vote, is that they're apathetic. But the truth is it's more of an access issue sometimes. Young people who have never voted before are often watching the news. And I say the news, they're consuming news. They may not be watching our channels, but they're consuming news and they're largely engaged in the issues. I talked to non-voters this week who knew what was going on in DC. They knew what was going on in the country, but they didn't translate that into actually going to the polls. Now, why is that? Why are so many young people paying attention to issues but not voting? There's a few issues in that. One is that they feel like the system doesn't work for them. And frankly, a lot of middle America felt that way too. And that was an opportunity for Donald Trump to come in and say, I can make this system work for you. The other thing about young voters is they don't feel like either party represents them well. So they aren't going to go vote just because their favorite politician is out there or because the party says you should vote. They want something to vote for. And their expectations for what a president should be able to do in office is frankly quite different than what an older voter's expectations are. But that said, if you give them something to vote for, young people are way more likely to go out to the polls. If you don't talk about the issues important to them, they're going to sit on the sidelines. And I think what we saw is a lot of young conservatives may have sat on the sidelines in this election because they may care about the economy more than the young progressive. They may care about different issues, immigration. They may care about the crime issue more than a young progressive does. But the young conservative didn't have people talking to them. They didn't have a lot of Republicans who said, I want to do this and I want to talk about climate, because even young conservatives recognize things like climate are a big issue. They do recognize things like social justice are a big issue too. And when you have Republicans who largely tune out that giant portion of the electorate, a lot of young conservatives may sit on the sidelines.
You know, you mentioned that a lot of times they don't feel that they identify with either party, which could mean that they're not choosing to register with either party, which in a state like Pennsylvania means they can't take part in the primary, which is a closed primary in Pennsylvania. So how does that impact things in terms of their involvement if they can't get involved until the general? Is that something that is having an influence on the process? Is that something that is having an influence on the voters and the decisions that they make?
Absolutely. So young voters, much more than old voters, are likely to register no party affiliation or independence, or in some cases, third party. But they are much less tethered to the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And as you mentioned, states with closed primaries, they're basically disenfranchised. They don't have a say in that election. And because 80% of our Congress is gerrymandered across the country, that means 80% of the time, young people don't actually have any say in their congressional representatives.
All right, Noah Pransky, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.